phone cut off just now. I hate when they do that. But anyway, yeah. Either Malcolm asked him if it was true, and right before Elijah Muhammad spoke, Malcolm cut in, letting them know what, the way that he could frame it. You know what I mean? To not, so it doesn't come out as bad. Or right before Malcolm, right before Malcolm asked the question, Elijah Muhammad spoke. Either way, as far as like the content of the conversation, Malcolm did try to let him know that he had an argument to defend him, and that very argument Elijah Muhammad already knew of, based on what they wrote or what they said in the book. They was like, before Malcolm could go into the words, that's when Elijah Muhammad said, I already know you got a good understanding. You always have had a good understanding of prophecy, things spiritual, and then he referenced each character that basically Malcolm was going to bring up from the Bible to kind of like put into perspective why it is still a part of prophecy. You know what I mean? Basically, like, okay, the overarching thing is all of this, like, almost as if that is incidental. You know what I mean? To what Elijah Muhammad is put on earth to do in the first place. Basically, that was the type of argument Elijah Muhammad pretty much not just acquiesced. He didn't acquiesce. He's basically just agreed with him and said, that's what I am. You know what I mean? So he came out and admitted. Now, as far as like like they had a certain moral code in that sense, because when you take away like I guess you could call it an innovation in terms of codes of conduct. You take away that, it's like that was kind of like normal, really. Like in Islamic culture, really in Arabian culture, and not just Arabian culture. I mean, it's so obvious. That was kind of like a normal thing, and it's still normally practiced by many people today. So I'm like, okay, you take away the frames, you take away the brackets. He really didn't do nothing that really completely contradicts the religion. But I guess within a innovation and a certain set and standard of codes of operation, I guess you could say he did. But I don't know. I don't know. Adultery. It was just. I guess I'm like, if you look at it in a raw, he impregnated other women or whatnot. But if there was some type of mutual understanding, it could also be perceived as like, okay, they were like concubines in a sense. And the only reason those other two women came, and I'm not trying to defend them, I'm just saying a certain way to look at it is like, and the only reason them other two women came out is probably because, they was in isolation. So it was hard for them to support themselves. You still got to consider the context back then at the same time. You know what I'm saying? Especially black people. There's only 22 million of us. Everything wasn't exactly what it is today. So you got to consider that. They probably did it sincerely to get some type of financial assistance. It's not like they saying, okay, he raped me, he played with my emotions. You know what I'm saying? That's the only reason why they came out. But so I'm like, they could have argued it a certain way, but it was like they were already kind of limited or provisioned because of the moral code that the Nation of Islam had. So what Elijah Muhammad did based on that moral code was considered adultery. But it's crazy. But anyway, after that was a revelation that stuck with Malcolm X, and it was also something that he couldn't get over. So eventually, actually, right before he decided to go to Mecca, that's what John F. Kennedy died, November the 22nd, 1964, right? Or was it 1963? Was it 1963 or 1964? If I'm incorrect, I'll post something, saying that I made an error. I'm going to say 1964, November 22nd, 1964. He died. It was an order put out by Elijah for no Muslim to speak on it. Malcolm spoke on it anyway after a speaking engagement. And, he said the famous words, chickens coming home to roost. So he was suspended from that point. Eventually, Malcolm came to the understanding that that was just another way to banish him at the same time. So psychologically, that's when he decided to depart from the Nation of Islam. Plus, he ended up coming across death threats. The first one was by a city council in Louisiana. They offered like $10,000 for his death. At this point, he did a lot of introspecting. Then the first official death threat from the higher ups within the Nation of Islam, in particular Elijah Muhammad, was from one of Malcolm's own assistants from Seven Temple. It's two of them actually. The second guy was supposed to bomb his car because he had knowledge in demolition. But he came out because he respected Malcolm X's sincerity and admired him. He came out and let him know that he was hired to kill him. That was the first. That's when Malcolm started speaking to the public, letting everybody know what was going on. Eventually, he decided to go to Mecca. He had a conversation with his sister Eller. He went to Boston, I believe. He called her, and he also went to Boston. And he let her know that he wanted to go to Mecca. She asked him how much he needed, and then she paid for his trip. He finally went out to Mecca. He had the experience that the movie illustrates. I mean, this is a common part. That's why I kind of don't want to speak on it, because this is like known. He had the experience to where, he ate, sat, slept, congregated basically with people of different hues and complexions and pupil complexions, and it was a different type of air. It's a different type of air that he felt. You had people from various countries, from Africa, from Nigeria as well, that came there to make the Hajj. So it was different schemas in a sense. He was outside of an American framework of a schema, but also he was kind of treated like, he felt regal, and that made him reflect after his journey from Mecca also, because what made him feel regal is that, first off, it was a guy, a professor of Cairo University, right? And the book says, his name is Mahmoud Youssef Swabi. He had wrote a letter, for Malcolm X, for him to make the pilgrimage to Mecca. Because remember, he was still an ex-con, you know what I'm saying? So he wrote the letter for him, and he also gave Malcolm X a book. It was called The Eternal Message of Muhammad. The author of this book, I can't call his name, it's Al-Rakan something, but Al-Rakan something. But anyway, this author, they said he was also like a personal advisor to the Prince of Arabia, a guy by the name of Faisal at the time. All right, so Malcolm X made the trip or whatnot, and then when he went there, he was also given the keys to Prince Faisal's suite, and that made him feel even more good, and he felt like he was blessed, and he just kept coming across what he perceived to be signs of Allah or whatnot, and he was also officially recognized as a state guest, and provided like a car and an assistant and a guide everywhere he went. So his trip was pretty good. After that, he went to. He also mingled with someone because he went to, I think, what they call it, the Hajj courts or something like that. So it was a lot of high-profile officials that he came across, and he was treated with respect and dignity. And then after he left Mecca, he went to visit Lebanon. Then after Lebanon, Lebanon. Then after Lebanon, he went to Egypt. After Egypt, he went to Nigeria and Ghana. So he wrote letters basically talking about his experiences. He wrote to his family. He wrote to some of his ministers at Temple. well, some of the people that were with him at Temple 7, you know what I mean, before he departed for the Nation of Islam. So that was his journey. On the way back, he illustrated that. He spoke on it constantly at different press conferences. He also established the Muslim Mosque, Inc., which basically had the same program as the Nation of Islam, and basically the same kind of like sharp arguments, but, you know, the same aim as well. Only this time, you know, they would include more than just Muslims or those of an Islamic persuasion. All kind of people. Just white people couldn't join. And so it's kind of like, you know, some of the arguments Marcus Garvey had, the Nation of Islam shared as well. Then, you know, kind of like it's similar to that principle as far as Malcolm's program. He still didn't allow white people to join because, you know, not just because of the psychological effects, but more so because he felt like it should be more of a challenge in view, because it forces, if you were white at the time and you were sincere, which he pointed out toward the end of this book, further into the end of this book, that he felt like it was a lot of white people that were sincere and that wanted to see change back then. But as far as like membership into the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, he felt like if you were white, you should feel more challenged to go out there and do your part, not necessarily focus or feel some type of way about not being able to enlist officially in the black organization. You know what I mean? Because he also left room, as far as Malcolm, you know, it's Muslim Mosque, Inc., for them to work with other organizations that are non-black at the same time. But it's just, as far as membership, he had a certain code of conduct and reason for that as well. So, so he continued to receive death threats, and everywhere he went, he was, you know, vigilant, because he was semi-paranoid at the same time, but very vigilant. He had in mind, he understood that, like, you know, at any moment, you know, any willing Muslim of a rank and file all the way down to the poorest person, you know what I mean, or just a supporter, could come out and try to assassinate him for various reasons, even if it's an autonomous individual who has no connection whatsoever to a sorority or a group. You know, they just might be a crazy person that feel like they're doing a good deed by offing Malcolm X. It was all kind of reasons, but he kept it in mind. Eventually, he finally got touched for the first time, February 14th, 1965. His house had got bombed. Somebody threw like some bombs through the window or whatnot, some cocktail bombs through the window. Pretty much burnt down the house or whatnot. It forced Malcolm and his family to kind of like seek emergency housing for about a week. I forget how long, but for like a little short period of time. Because remember, they wasn't being funded by the Nation of Islam at this point. Even though he still had a lot of followers, you know what I mean? He still didn't have as much as he had when he was, you know, more so connected with the Nation of Islam. By himself, he's less of an entity in a certain regard in comparison as far as finance is concerned. So they had to stay somewhere in the emergency housing. And then as far as like this book itself, you know, he got an advancement, you know, that helped him buy another home somewhere else. But see, that didn't last that long, because 7 days after that, that's when he finally caught up with Malcolm. February 21st, 1969, in Harlem at the Audubon Ballroom. It was 4 gunmen. 2 initially stood up first. First, it was some type of commotion that happened in the front row. Then 2 guys stood up, ran toward Malcolm, fired shots. And then another 2 guys on the, not the opposite side, but like the 2 guys who first ran up the shot ran up toward Malcolm's right side, facing them. The other ones would be more so on Malcolm's left side, the other 2. And his wife and his daughters were also in the front seat, so they witnessed that death as well. So he was killed. So that's basically the whole story of Malcolm X as far as like within the book. Now, I thought it was interesting. And like I said, I included some of my thoughts, and I'm going to include a little bit more as far as what I wrote 5 years ago called The Analysis of the Mind of Malcolm X. Now, one of the things is that, like, I'm just say this first. A while ago, I spoke on Frederick Douglass and his son Henry Douglass. It was just a little thing that I pointed out as far as what I noticed, as far as like, his son enlisting and also fighting in the Civil War. Being Frederick Douglass was who he was at the time. He was somebody of some type of notoriety, some type of importance, at least relatively speaking. And I don't even want to say relatively speaking. He was somebody of some type of importance. For him to take a chance like that and allow his son to enlist in the Massachusetts Brigade, or what, 54th Fighting Brigade or whatnot, or regiment, and face the chances of death equally with, like, poor African Americans, some people that, a lot that are illiterate. I mean, you talking about like coming from the most uncomfortable of the most uncomfortable, and him allowing his son to take a chance like that, and also publishing letters that Henry wrote to him, and Frederick Douglass will publish them in the Liberator. I mean, to me, I admire that, regardless of how I or one may view Frederick Douglass's philosophy. It's the sincerity part right there. That's the dedication. You can't get no more ultimate than that, aside from more extreme examples. But this one is definitely genuine. That's how I look at it as far as that. Now, Malcolm X, for instance, aside from the keen arguments and the sociological perspective, it's his sincerity. He's not like, when I think about, like, as far as like what I know, and those that people call revolutionaries and all this type of stuff. And again, you got your extreme examples, you got your non-extreme examples, but fucking from A to Z, these are all genuine examples. As far as Malcolm X, now, I'm not saying he like a Che Guevara out there, shooting guns, but his sincerity, like, to me, my measurement of his sincerity is that it was not something he was playing with. You get what I'm saying? Like, when I think about his okay. Before he had sex with Betty, he went 12 years without sex. Alright? I'm talking about without penetration, without sex. He points this out in the book. This is doing his ministry at the same time, after he converted in prison. The dedication that he put in at these different mosques, starting with Mosque 7. And after 3 months, they gained like 300 fucking members, pretty much. You know what I'm saying? And then that shit became so consistent, it was almost consecutively done throughout Malcolm's earlier start, definitely, as far as like then him going to Boston, then creating a temple there, Temple 11, and then him going to Philadelphia, Temple 12, and then so on, and Springfield, Massachusetts, and Atlanta, Temple 7, and him creating, bringing in more members, all that type of stuff. Like, that takes dedication. Like, it's not like he was out there. It wasn't like a hobby. You know what I mean? Like, okay, the incident with Johnson Hinton, for example. You know what I'm saying? You're talking about 50 years ago, all right? When a lot of people was getting away with a lot of shit. It's a book called 100 Years of Lynchings. It's a 100-year catalog of various horrific stories and killings and murders and all kind of shit that, white people did get away with. And this book is like a compilation of articles all the way up to the 20th century now. You know what I'm saying? So as far as like the civil rights movement, you going back 50 years. That's not too far from the date of these publishings, the last publishings in this book, 100 Years of Lynchings. So again, aside from like the black codes and all that type of stuff, still you got to consider the social atmospherics of it, more so the implicit shit. All right, for this guy to get his head busted like that in Harlem, and again, this is like one extraction from a pool of atmospherics of a lot of shit that was going on at the same time. So for him to get his head busted like that, and then within 30 minutes they have 50 members from Temple 7 itself down there in formation, in protest, in bold protest, which means what? It's not a play. They wasn't going down there to get pictures. At this point, they wasn't that big yet, as far as like media attention is concerned. This is a local situation that happened in Harlem. Within 30 minutes, they out there. They're not looking for a camera crew. And again, you can't disregard the atmospherics at the same time. So basically, what I'm saying is, what went on with him, as far as that guy getting his head busted, hitting, was so wrong. You know, they were ready to lose their lives if necessary. For example, when they spoke to the policeman lied and said he wasn't there. For them to continue to follow up until, you know, they finally come out and say, okay, he is there. There was some type of quarreling going on at the same time, so it wasn't a bluff, is what I'm saying. They knew that the guy was there, and they wasn't going to just like, oh, okay, well, you say he's not here, let's walk off. Nah, you know, they was ready to basically die right there within that moment. That's sincerity, but as far as like, you know, what Malcolm X always highlights is what they're told is they don't carry guns, and they don't start fights, but they do believe in self-defense. To me, again, these are measurements of sincerity. Like, I heard certain other people, like, you know, when they mention Malcolm X, like a Cornel West, for example, and this is no disrespect, I'm just saying, like, he'll always say, yeah, Malcolm X. Like, he's not the only person that says this, but, you know, he's popular, so I reference his name. They basically be like, yeah, Malcolm X is doing a lot of talking while Martin Luther King was out there on the field. That's because they had a different code of conduct. You know what I'm saying? Like, that incident within itself was a bold incident. You know, it's a known incident, but people don't really. I don't think they take in the shadow expression of the incident. Like, it wasn't a bluff. They was ready to die right then and there. You don't think that if an order like that was given to where they changed their modes, you don't think Malcolm X, I'm talking about before, you know, these revelations with Elijah Muhammad, you don't think that Malcolm X would follow that mold, especially how sincere he was toward Elijah Muhammad? You don't think if there were some type of modifications to where they got more radical, like, you know, basically like the measures that the Black Panthers took and the offspring groups later on during their existence when they were almost killed off, you don't think like if Elijah Muhammad decided to modify into those methods that Malcolm X would have went along with that, especially if he attempted to intellectualize and justify, you know, Elijah's immoral deeds. If he attempted to justify that, you don't think he would have went on? I'm talking about logically speaking. It should be common sense. You know, I just don't like how people, you know, I don't know, I just think he was a sincere guy, and like I say, his arguments, you know, even though like the Nation of Islam, as far as their observations of the societal things, you know, I feel like they did kind of highlight a lot of what was pointed out by other people at the same time. But for the most part, collectively speaking, that is a perspective, right? You know, some people call it radical in its most rawest form. But that perspective makes a lot of fucking sense. I always said that. And that was another thing about Malcolm that I liked, because like just putting it in plain comments, it's like, okay, think about it. Self-defense, like, okay, self-defense, okay, yeah. But do for self, basically. Like right now, it's really not hard to make it in the regular society. If you work, you could be at the bottom of the most bottom, aside from everything else that's going on. But just say like me, for instance, you can go like get like a temp agency job and stick with that. Save money. It's so many different type of ways. It's like, I feel like if that formula, I'm gonna put it like this. I feel like if that formula, because I don't want my phone to cut off, that formula was completely and substantially manifested from that point on in, I still feel like black people collectively, as far as within the United States, would be in a much more better position and predicament in so many facets. You know what I mean? Just to give a summation of it. That's just honestly what I believe. Now, as far as like, his intelligence, that was another thing that I admire about him. Him being studious. Just reading and liking to engage. That's why I feel I do not believe that he completely believed in the story of Yakub, and that's no disrespect. It's just like when you look at like in the audio version of his book. For some reason, they didn't mention this, but it is in the book because I remember it. It was a list of some of the books, the names of some of the books that Malcolm read. And it basically, when you look at his book list, it dealt with history, genetics, I think anthropology, like a whole range of subjects, right? When I think about the story of Yakub and the analysis of the mind of Malcolm X, I broke down the story as it is taught and why I do not agree with it. But I'm trying to make it real quick and simple here. Basically, it's like it's traced back 6,600 years ago. There are innumerable archaeological artifacts of, I call it, human civilization that predates the 7th millennium BC. That far predates it. You know what I mean? That's a whole nother blog. You know what I mean? But as far as not just the date itself, what went on at the time doesn't make sense. Even prior to that, the 24 scientists, and then one, turning against the rest of them, and he went and later built the whole tribe called the tribe of Shabazz, and then within this tribe, later on, another guy named Yakub ended up being born, and he came from a certain, like within the population of this tribe later, about 30% of the people were dissatisfied. Within that dissatisfied amount, that's the more niche, I guess, that he was born from. But he began preaching, and he was a dissident, political dissident, basically. He began preaching, and he gained about almost 60,000 followers, 59,000 followers. Eventually, they got put out of the land, and they went to an island called Patmos, which is near Turkey. That's when Yakub decided to graft a white race. It took 800 years, basically taking the lighter complexions, the darker and the light, mixing them. Now, genetically speaking, I was pointing out when I was talking about like recombination, for example, how it doesn't work that easy like that. It's not, when you're talking about gene L's and variations and all that. If you take a dark-skinned person and a light-skinned person, it doesn't always, or a slightly light-skinned person, it doesn't go in a reverse chronological way that sharply. It don't happen like that. It's not like it's a 50-50. So that's why I was saying that process wouldn't make sense within itself, because it's so random as far as the colors that come out. You'll definitely get a person of color. You know what I'm saying? And the dominant definitely overtakes the recessive. But I'm saying as far as the variations of colors, you're not finna get a successive reverse chronological downward. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not finna just keep, like, if you talking about going from dark to light, you're not going the process is too random. That's what I'm saying as far as the gene expression for color. It's too random. You're gonna get a person of color, but it would never work like that to where you just keep breeding these people and slowly but surely you're gonna create a whole entire race of white people. That's what I was saying. Genetically, that's impossible. But according to the story, that's my opinion. According to the story, it took 800 years for them to do this. And they finally did that. Yaku eventually, he had died at the, what? Well, it wasn't his age, but, from the moment, I think, from after this race was created as far as white people, that's when Yaku died. It was either 157 years later or 152 years later. But that's when he ended up dying. Now, but he still taught these people a certain code of conduct at the same time. Now, based on the authors of the story, the code of conduct is tricknology and it's also devilish. But they eventually left and went back into Africa and eventually created havoc, so they got kicked out again. When they got kicked out again, this is years later, by the way. When they got kicked out again, they got marched across the Arabian desert and then all the way into the caves and hills of Europe. And they were considered uncivilized from the get-go or whatnot. So that's the story of them. And then later Moses came, and a part of prophecy was for Moses. He took them from the caves and raised them up. And these first people are who the Jews are. That's how the story goes and whatnot. So I was just like, considering Malcolm's book list and then watching him in debates. Like I said, the first one that I came across I'm talking about like after high school, that I actually watched in full was him versus Bayard Rustin, and the polar opposite arguments, integration versus segregation, basically. And again, if you're talking about, the raw forms of this perspective that people just happen to agree with, or just, what I'm saying, it's not whatever. Malcolm argued more so what would be considered a radical expression, which would be segregation, but his reasons for it. But again, it made so much fucking sense, and it still makes sense or whatnot. Think about those debates and the logic implied, and then there's all you gotta do is type it in on YouTube. You don't even have to go to a library. You could just type it in. All of it is available, the whole catalog, all kind of show appearances, table discussions, debates, all of it is on YouTube. All you got to do is type it in. Now, when you listen to what he's saying, like, and look at how sincere he is at the same time. Sometimes, like when he's at a table discussion, you see him moving around, but it's a different type of. It's not like a style for a camera.